The speak up rate for sexual harassment, for example, is really low. The national average from our research tells us that, it sits under 20%. But, people who are going through these poor behaviours just will not speak up. And so it's about looking at what are the roadblocks.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Providing a safe workplace is not an option anymore. It is an essential. And building great workplace culture today is about a place where people love to work, where it is safe psychologically and physically, and there is enormous respect for each other. There is a lot to navigate through with changes to legislation, work health and safety, wellness, psychological health and safety, the right to disconnect, and of course, the rise of the hybrid workplace. It has never been so critical as it is today for leaders to be across all of this. And of course, much of this is new ground, so we are learning and developing policy as we go. We often look at what behaviours we want in the workplace. However, we need to spend just as much time to what behaviour is not acceptable. We need to ensure that processes and systems are in place and how much rigour there is around these so that everybody is on the same page. It's also important for leaders to model behaviours, to walk the talk and to understand that what you walk past is the standard that you accept. Do you have a clear set of values in place that you revisit on a regular basis? Have you fostered a strong speak-up culture so that people feel safe to report behaviours? A good culture means good business. Karen Maher is one of Australia's most sought-after anti-bullying and sexual harassment experts, presenting to panels, boards, teams and conferences across the country. Her experience in this field spans over 17 years, firstly as an employment and safety lawyer in Australia and the UK, then as a consultant and keynote speaker. Karen's legal background, coupled with a desire to make workplaces happier and safer, is what inspires and continues to drive her to specialise in the field of workplace diligence and all that it includes. As she says, providing a safe workplace is not optional, it's essential. Set the bar high, be the best. We invited her to speak to us on what leaders need to be aware of to keep their people safe and well, and how do we build safe workplaces and great cultures. Please enjoy this wonderful conversation with Karen Maher. Hello, Karen. Welcome to Future Fit Podcast. Wonderful to have you on our program and great to reconnect too. Last time we met, you were on stage.
Oh, lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Sadhna.
So we're here to talk about something that's quite critical in conversations today, which is building safe workplaces, under which and that's quite a broad umbrella under which a lot of things come under, and you really specialise in this field. But before we dig into that, it'd be great for our listeners to know a little bit about Karen Maher, your background, and I'm really intrigued to find out how you got into this space as well.
So I've been in this space for about 20 years now, and I started pretty much as an employment and health and safety lawyer back in 2003. Feels like a long time ago now. Always been interested in this space. I actually had a few issues before my time as a lawyer in this area, where as a young worker, I was exposed to a few incidents, mostly around sexual harassment. And so on the back of that, I think I always had that kind of thought process in my mind to sort of strengthen my voice in this space. Very interested in the employment law side of things and the health and safety side of things, and worked as a lawyer in Australia and the UK for about 6 years. And then I got a bit sick of being a lawyer, because as a lawyer, you tend to get involved in things very much at the end of the process. Quite often it can be very reactive, and you're usually getting involved in a case or a situation where things are pretty bad. It's very reactive, a bit of damage control, really. And so I left law after about 6 years to start my own business, which is now Smart Culture, to help organisations to be more proactive, which is, of course, where the law now expects us to be in this space, which is great. Yeah, so I guess that's a bit of a background, and just, really focusing on that prevention piece. I think obviously that's the sweet spot. Working in the reactive zone is just no fun for anybody.
No, one of the things you said on stage at the conference that we both met at, it was like, but when you see me, it's too late. And it really resonated with me, because sometimes, we kind of go, she'll be fine, everything will be okay, we've got all the policies and procedures, and when in fact you don't. And it's true, by the time we see someone like you in our businesses, it is actually too late.
Yeah. Certainly. I've done quite a few investigations over the years and things like that too. And just, seeing all the damage and the harm and the hurt to everybody, it's so hard to, sometimes you can never undo that. We can never undo the hurt to someone when the harm is quite serious. And that's happens a lot, and it still happens so much. And when you think about how advanced we are in some places, still in this space, we have a long way to go.
Karen, you mentioned that, you've come into this space around workplace bullying and sexual harassment prevention because you were a victim, or, you experienced this yourself. Could I ask you, if it's not too personal, because I think sometimes we forget that the person, who is the victim has to prove the case. As such, it's quite often not on the other side to prove the case. It's quite often on the victim. For our listeners listening in, I think it's important for them to understand how it makes that person feel, because, it's that empathy piece and understanding piece. And if you haven't been in that position, it's not something you can understand. Could you share some of that with us?
Oh, certainly. And I mean, this is something that I do see in the cases and the work that I do. It's still very, very hard for people who have been involved in it. There's so much of a fear factor. There's so many things that so many roadblocks to people speaking up, and, just the concerns around, will I be believed? And, will this mean that I'll never get a promotion? Or does this mean career suicide? There's so many moving parts to it. I think, will I be believed is one of the hardest ones. And I think it's also really hard when, quite often, particularly with sexual harassment, and again, a lot of the cases I've worked on, it does involve a little bit of a he said, she said situation. And, unless you have an incredibly skilled investigator, or you have someone who really knows what they're doing going through that evidence, quite often organisations will steer clear of, making a finding if they don't have that strong evidence per se. It is really hard. And I think on top of that is the young worker piece, or that vulnerable worker who, needs work, who, they might be a migrant worker, or they might be on a visa, or there might be so many moving parts to why they might be vulnerable, and they're exposed to this kind of behavior, and their fear is, tripled, because they just think, if I speak up, I probably won't have a job tomorrow. Yeah, I'm really passionate about the young worker piece. And again, I think because of the experiences I went through, I feel, for young workers, they're just in that unique position where they just don't have so many runs on the board as far as life experience goes, and just understanding how to navigate situations. And, when I was a young worker, I put up with a lot of poor behavior. And I was actually just talking about this to a friend the other day. And it was just like, that was just the way it was. This is work, and this is just what I have to put up with. This is normal. This behavior is normal. And I think things are changing a little bit, but we're still not there yet. I still work on a lot of cases with young workers who are still exposed to these really serious behaviours, which is really upsetting, to be honest. We're still not there yet. The young worker piece is a tricky one.
You write about active bystanders, and how when you can see this happening in the workplace, we can become active bystanders. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
I think it's a good one because I think what it does when we do a lot of work on bystanders and what you can do if you're in a situation where you see something happen, or you might see someone being chipped away at, or you might hear some inappropriate behavior. But often what we do in that situation is, as humans, we either do a little bit of a nervous giggle because
Mm.
usually we want to fit in, or sometimes we just freeze. We don't know what to do under those circumstances, which is really normal. And so working on the active bystander piece is understanding what we can do a bit differently to make it clear, "Oh, I'm not okay with that. What is happening here, I'm actually not okay with." And going through strategies of what you can do, there are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, where instead of being silent, or instead of going to that natural nervous giggle reaction or freezing, what can I do differently? There are things like you could call it out, particularly if you're in a leadership role. How was that joke funny? It could be a joke about somebody's sexual orientation, or it could be inappropriate banter. How's that comment okay? Rather than just not saying anything, even like causing a distraction. So if somebody's, kicking off in a meeting, or if someone's just going overboard, maybe it's just, why don't we move on to the next topic? Or, what else can we do? Asking a random question about anything just to change the topic. And even being an active bystander can even be getting some help. If you feel like, it's not safe to do something, or you won't be supported, maybe it's delegating it to somebody else. Or, if you're at a social event, it might be having a chat to security and saying, "Hey, I need some help here. I'm a bit worried about that person." Or, "One of my friends is, struggling. Can you help me with this?" Or maybe going and chatting to another leader and saying, "Can you help me?" Or, "I've noticed this has been happening. I don't feel comfortable to do something myself, but I'm letting you know, so then you can help me, help us try to resolve it and make sure it doesn't
Mm.
keep happening." So there's a lot we can do rather than just sort of doing the whole, freeze and hope it goes away. Because
It
yeah, hope
doesn't
is
go away.
yeah, hope's not a strategy. It never goes away. It usually gets worse. That's for sure.
Just picking up on that,
Mm,
not to the bystanders, but those who, this sort of behavior is happening towards.
mm.
Reporting in businesses, you've been into many businesses. Are we reporting these things in the right way, where we've got the right protections for everybody in place? There is enough, it's not identifiable data to start off with, as an example, which sometimes people avoid being a bystander reporting because they don't
Yeah.
want to be identified. Are we doing it as well as we could, or can we do it better?
Oh, we could definitely do it better. And I think that organizations have a huge role in working on enhancing their speak up cultures and their speak up processes. The speak up rate for, for sexual harassment, for example, is really low. The national average, let's call it the national average from our research, tells us that, it sits under 20%. So this is, again, we're sending people to Mars in a couple of
Mm.
years, but, people who are going through these poor behaviors just will not speak up. And so it's about looking at what are the roadblocks? Why don't people speak up in our organizations, and understanding those and starting to really knock them down. I think a lot of people, again, working with all different industries, if sometimes in government, it's a little bit of fear factor around, where's this going to go? There are 14,000 policies I need to consider. How many people are going to hear about this? Or then you might have a smaller organization, say retail, or maybe it's a restaurant or something like that. They don't even have a speak up process. So again, it's like, if you're not told about how to speak up, the natural assumption for many people is that they don't want to hear about it, or I don't even know how to do it. So there's a lot of work. And I think organizations, I'm seeing a big shift in this, where organizations are getting better at enhancing that, having speak up campaigns and actually saying, we want to hear about this, training their leaders on how to, how to be that first responder when somebody who is quite vulnerable, who might be, experiencing trauma and so many different parts to it. How do you respond in the moment to make them feel safe and to make sure they're supported, rather than, "Oh, that's great. Thanks for telling me that. And I'm a bit busy at the moment. Let me come back to you tomorrow." It's a lot of it's about education and just having basic speak up systems where people feel supported.
Mm. And
So,
it's so much part of your culture, isn't it? Because sometimes we think, oh, culture is all the rah rah stuff and everybody feels
yeah.
happy and great and we come in and we high five each other. And I think, I think in one of your books, or one of your brochures that I've read, it's it looks and feels like magic, but the truth is that it's not.
Oh,
And you know, smart culture is the name of your business. So talk
yeah.
to me about the cultural piece when these sorts of behaviors manifest in businesses.
Oh, the cultural piece is just enormous. Like you can have the most detailed systems in the world, and some clients definitely have those. But if we don't have that positive culture, no one will report anything. No one's going to speak up. And so, yeah, the culture piece is just huge. A lot of organizations, they look at the workplaces and the organizations who have those really strong cultures, and they do look at them and they think, oh, they kind of wake up like that every day, so to speak. But there's nothing magic about it. There's so much effort that goes in. There's so much thought. Workplace cultures, the best of the best, are measured. They're guarded. They look into how can they continually improve. How can they take a safety approach to this? How can we increase our awareness? How can we increase our education? How are we measuring against our policies, against our systems? And yeah, there are so many moving parts to it. There's no magic in it at all.
And there's a lot to consider now. So you've gone from having psychological safe workplaces, the right to disconnect,
Yeah.
safe workplaces in terms of work health and safety,
Mm.
and then you add in harassment and bullying. There are a number of policies that businesses and business leaders need to be across to make sure that they have a safe workplace where people want to belong.
Oh, for sure. And I think I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, everything's changed more than I would say in the 20 years that I've been in this space. As I've obviously got my business, and I understand, as a smaller business owner, it's not easy. We work again with federal regulators, we work with, emergency services, we work with, all different types of, financial organizations, retail, hospitality, construction. But what is happening at the moment is, every employer is going through this process where they're having to do it better. Before, it was a bit of like, oh, it'd be good to do this and to have, this culture connected to safety. But now with our health and safety laws and our regulators getting more focused on the psychosocial safety and keeping people safe, here, not just from the physical safety, it's really pushing the change and the shift, which is music to my ears, because I've been sort of going on about this for so long and just talking about these behaviors being safety matters for a long time. So there's a really big shift in how things are being regulated, which is again helpful. But it is, at the moment, a lot of organizations are feeling a bit of overwhelm, because it's how do we systemize this? And exactly like you said, how many policies do we need in this space? When you think of all the different psychosocial hazards, yeah, it's a bit overwhelming, but I always just say, just got to start at the start and come up with a bit of a plan and keep ticking things off, and just, it's a bit of a journey. We have to start at the start.
Can I unpack psychosocial safety for people who, because that's a big new term, and
Yeah, it
it's
is. Yeah.
only really emerged probably in the last few years.
Yes. Yeah.
Unpack that for me and my listeners a bit more. What does it mean? What do some of the behaviors look like around that?
Really what obviously we've had this huge shift from our health and safety side of things from a workplace point of view, where, we used to focus so heavily, didn't we, on the physical safety, people not falling off an unergonomic chair, or, people not falling from heights, or, making sure they're safe working in and around mobile plant and working around electricity and everything like that. And our health and safety regulators were very focused on that. But what we have seen, and again, obviously on the back of, I guess, so many cases and so much research, is that, people being safe at work is not just around that physical safety. We have to make sure that people are safe here, when we talk about our psychological health and safety. And so we've had a lot of our regulators have identified a whole list of psychosocial hazards. So it's really any hazard which can affect our psychological health and safety, and sometimes our physical health and safety as well. And so some of those include work demands. So it could be high work demands or even low work demands. It could be things like aggression. It could be things like sexual harassment, bullying and harassment, and things like that. Being exposed to traumatic materials. We're seeing a lot of cases involving that now. Whereas before, these types of issues were a little bit more of a sort of that HR issue that, would sort of be dealt with a little bit differently. Under our health and safety regimes, we need to be looking out for these hazards and doing everything we can to provide a safe workplace to not only the physical health and safety of our people, but also the psychological health and safety. Because I always say that if people aren't safe here, they might not even make it to work. We can't even get them to come to work. This is really interesting. We've got our health and safety regulators who, up until about 5 years ago, sexual harassment wasn't even seen as a health and safety hazard. And of course it is, because, if anyone's been through that, they'll be on my side when you certainly don't feel safe. But now it's absolutely recognised as such. And we are seeing many of our regulators, they're starting to prosecute organisations for failing to provide a safe workplace when these hazards exist. And so a huge shift there. And I do feel like obviously it's a shift for the better. But again, organisations just really trying to get on top of how they can be proactive, like our law expects, and start to, look at these different psychosocial hazards, which ones might apply to us, and how can we risk manage them and start to take that risk management approach to keep people as safe as possible from those hazards as far as they possibly can.
What are some of the common misconceptions that you've come across around workplace bullying and sexual harassment in the workplace?
I think in the cases that I've worked on, a lot of the misconceptions are around, I think, intention. A lot of people will say, it's the whole story around, oh, that's just the way we talk, or that's just the banter. That's how we've always done it. We always talk like that. Everybody, oh, they don't mind. And so
Or I didn't mean it that way, which is
I
the
didn't
most
mean it
common
that
one we hear.
way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't intend to sexually harass
Mm.
someone. Like, I've worked in roles where, someone has sexually harassed someone, that's the allegations. And then, the lawyers get involved and they draft up the allegation letters. And then you're sitting across from someone in that deep, dark HR meeting, and you pass them the allegation letter and they open this up. And then the next minute they're looking at it and they're like, what? I didn't sexually harass someone. I didn't intend to sexually harass someone. And then usually the crocodile tears come out because I can't believe I'm in this situation. And then they have to learn the hard way that it's not about intention. It's not about if you say that comment or if you behave like that, it doesn't matter what you intend by it. That's not what the law requires, unless we're talking about a criminal case where, of course, the relevance of intention will be taken into account. That's probably one of the biggest ones that I see about misconceptions. The other misconception I probably see around from an organizational point of view is where leaders feel like if somebody raises something with them and says, "Oh, I'm just telling you, I don't want you to do anything about it," that they feel like they can be the secret keeper and they don't have to sort of escalate it, or they don't have to manage or address the issue, which is a tricky one. But there's so many legal duties now that we have to be conscious of and we have to balance out. And sometimes we do need to take action in those circumstances. So
It's a really unfair position to put someone into, isn't it? I'm going to tell you this, but don't tell anyone, because then you're making a bystander, forcing them into not being active and potentially
yeah.
being caught up in all of the shitstorm, excuse my language, it's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, perfect terminology there. No, definitely. It's also, as a leader, particularly, you have a duty. We have duties of care to people, and we also now we have our safety duties to provide and maintain a safe workplace. And as a fellow worker, we must take reasonable care for somebody's health and safety. We have duties to be reporting things as far as under our workplace gender equality requirements. Well, many organisations have those as well. And so it's just not information we can sit on anymore, that's for sure. And the other part to it is that if someone is telling you that information, quite often, well, in my experience, that person may not be doing so well. And so, I'm not a doctor or I'm not a psychologist. I can't fix that person as well. By us not acting or not doing something really does open up the door for that person to continue to be exposed to that poor behavior, which I have seen a lot as well, with really quite devastating outcomes. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. So my general advice is always, don't lock yourself into that secret keeper mode. Say, I might just nice and gently, I might need to get a bit of guidance on this, because if this is happening, I need to keep you safe. And so that way you can get some guidance. And it doesn't mean, always Inspector Gadget has to come along, and depending on the case. But yes, certainly sometimes the organisation will need to address the situation and respond in alignment with our duties, of course, to other people too.
In all the organisations that you've been, all of this has such a
impact on the overall organization. So you've got the impact on the leaders and the
Yeah.
board and the executive team. Then
Mm,
you've got the impact on the people involved
yeah.
directly. And then you've got the impact on the rest of the employees, which then has an impact on the business performance and overall profitability. Like,
Mm.
in all the places you've been into, how does that play out? And can you say that, if this happens in your organization, be ready for a 30-40% decline in productivity at the end of the day? Does it impact
Mm.
in that way?
Oh, it impacts in every way. Like if you have a serious case, particularly, and there's an investigation going on. I mean, I've even worked on cases involving like bullying and harassment where people have, they're no longer with us anymore. So you can only imagine, talk about, going back to the terminology of a shitstorm. Like it's just nonstop. And we don't even need that sort of extreme example. Productivity, when people are being exposed to this behavior, the productivity just goes down the tube. Performance goes down the tube because no one's kicking goals when they're either experiencing or watching or part of these behaviors. The impact when, if we have a serious case, can impact credibility of organizations, their reputations. I've seen it just tear organizations apart. I've seen it tear, working on cases involving, where there've been senior leaders involved, the absolute division amongst even the senior leadership team, because they're all getting pulled into it because they see the behavior and what's occurred as a reflection on them personally as well.
Mm.
From an external point of view, as people are watching these cases hit the media, they're pulled into that. And so it's just, yeah, unbelievable. And of course, if we want to be an employer of choice and if we want to have those great places to work, I mean, the first thing people do, don't they, when you're looking at, starting with a new employer is, checking out Google, all of that sort of stuff when we're seeing these negative behaviors and cases that are always, they hit the media and then they're there forever. That doesn't help. And I think it's just obviously in Australia in particular, if you've got that poor reputation, it's so easy for people to, it kind of sticks, doesn't it? So, and for a really long time. So many impacts. Yeah, we lose people. People don't want to come to work. People don't want to stay with the organization. So yeah, it's just nonstop.
What are some of the early warning signs that managers and employees should look out for?
So for these types of poor behaviors, I think probably the most common early warning signs of maybe when someone is disconnecting a little bit, if from a personal, like if you're talking about a particular employee, they're just not showing up the same. Their work might not be the same. They're making mistakes. Maybe they're taking more leave, or maybe from an organizational point of view, if your attrition rates are higher, when your engagement scores are going down, if you're doing surveys. I would always say that even if you're not having, like, often organizations will talk to me about, oh, but we're not getting reports of this type of behavior. It doesn't always mean it's not happening. Yeah. So I think it's sort of like, again, if people are disconnecting, if they're not performing the same, I think if they're not confident, I think if people aren't sort of contributing as well in the workplace, I see that quite often, because one of the big impacts for bullying and harassment is that people will often lose self-confidence, and self-worth quite happens really quickly too, actually. And so they kind of just start withdrawing from, social things as well. So I think they're probably some of the key areas.
If I was to put a policy in place in my business around anti-bullying and anti-harassment, what would be some of the elements that I would need to consider around that? Apart from getting somebody to write it for me, a professional, and outsource that stuff out.
That
But if I was,
GPT.
yeah, I don't know why people even want to try and write this stuff. But what are
Oh,
some of the
no.
key elements we should have in that?
I would always say keep it as simple as you can. And often people say, oh, that sounds okay. But then when you try to start to do it, it's hard. But I think keeping it as simple as you can, making sure that it's easy to read, that it's not too legal. Like sometimes I read these policies and I'm like, I don't even understand these. Like, how do you expect, people who don't focus on law to, to understand all this stuff? So keeping it as simple as possible, providing the definitions of the poor behaviors that you're trying to stop with examples so that people understand what they look and feel like, being really clear about what your expectations are, like what is okay and what's not okay, being really clear about how to speak up. If you're experiencing or seeing these things as a bystander, what are the avenues? Having a few different avenues as well is really important. The research tells us, and on the back of our Respect at Work inquiry, that, we need to have different avenues. You can't just have it, one person who, that you can speak up to, or one position. Otherwise, if that person who's experiencing it doesn't feel comfortable speaking to that person, they will not speak up. So, having the option to speak up to a leader, or, to someone in people and culture, or someone in HR, or a senior leader, is good to have a few options there, but making sure those leaders understand how to take a complaint. Yeah, being clear on the consequences, that if you do this, this is really serious and will be treated, very seriously, up to and including, the termination of your employment. I think that's really important. And I think the other part that is critical is making sure that you're putting into the policy how people can get support. A lot of organizations will have like an employee assistance program, or that, if you feel like you need support, please let us know. It might be a particular person within the organization, so we can set some support up for you. I think that's really, really important as well. Yeah, so I think they're the key things: definition, speak up process, what are the consequences? Yeah, what are the support mechanisms available to people? Yeah.
One of the quotes you have on your website, which I love, is that the behavior you walk past becomes the standard. And it's so critical for leaders, isn't it? Because if you want a workplace culture that has all the support and people feel safe and they can bring themselves to work, then it really, as a leader, when you walk past something that's not appropriate, no matter how hard it is, you've got to call it out.
Oh, 100%. There is no, like, I see so many organizations who, again, they've got all of these systems in place, and they've got all of these beautiful policies and all of these, beautifully crafted and developed and workshop values, but no one knows them, and no one follows them, and no one sort of walks the talk with them. And so they become really worthless very, very quickly. So yeah, definitely leaders are the linchpin. If your leaders are doing the right thing, if they understand the critical importance of role modeling, if they are walking the talk, if they don't walk past these things, it really does set the bar. If they walk past these things and they are involved in these things, it sets the bar very low. And it's very hard to turn that around. So yeah, so I think leaders are absolutely critical.
I want to talk a bit about what you do. And earlier I mentioned that, we don't really want to see someone like you in our businesses. When do you get called in? At what point does your phone ring in your business and they go, Karen, we have a job for you? What does that look like?
The bat phone. So the good thing is that like these days my role is a lot more proactive, and I get to do a lot more of the work with systems and things like that. So that's the good news. But in my previous, let's call it my previous life, when my phone would ring, it would be, yeah, something's happened, something's really serious and we need your help. It could be, we have a case, how do we sort of damage control this? How do we start the investigation? Even cases involving like very serious, where I might need to get on site and start an investigation straight away. That can be all different types of cases, up to and including, where, again, I've worked on cases where we've lost someone in the workplace and we need to, work out what happened, going through the evidence and going through doing interviews with everybody. And again, talk about damage control. That's the hardest thing ever to do that. So very stressful. I remember like when I used to do a lot more investigations in this space, I sort of did them very consciously so I could understand why things go wrong. But I remember in so many situations, I'd be as upset as everybody else. Sometimes you would almost feel like a bit of a counselor. And at that time, I was, had really young kids as well. And I would almost feel like I was a bit of a mother sometimes to people who I'd be talking to, because the human side of bullying and harassment and these negative behaviors is just so big. Yeah, it's really, really hard. I think it's an investigator's role particularly is a tough one, but also, the court case side of it as well. Like, I mean, working on these types of cases and spending time with people who have been treated really poorly is awful. One case that springs to mind, I was working in the UK and I was working for a government organisation, and one of the people I worked for, one of the cases involved a prison guard who'd been racially abused for a long time, racially harassed. And I'll just never, ever, ever forget, sitting there listening and talking to him and hearing his story and the way he had been treated for so long. supervisors involved in the behavior. It started as a bit of fun and apparently, a few jokes and sort of hassling his accent and things like that. And then it just got more and more serious. And then, up to the point where it became physical. And so the human side, and again, listening to the impact and just seeing how someone has had to live through this. And quite often, like, I'll be sitting with people and I'll just be thinking, honestly, they will never be the same again. This is something that cannot be undone. We might send people to psychologists or we might, give them medication, but yeah, so harmful. And another young worker I worked with, she'd heard that I'd experienced sexual harassment. And so she sort of reached out and shared a bit of her experience with me as well. Felt like it was almost identical to what I went through. And when I spoke with her and I saw the harm and I could even just sort of just see how much it had hurt her again, and sort of how she's dealt with that, what she's tried to do to get through it. And I just think that, again, like this harm is just next level, and these things are still happening. So that's hard. I think the human side of it, I think people don't often realize, that these cases can be that serious. Yeah.
You, with Smart Culture today, as you mentioned, you work more on the preventative side, which is, I imagine, a much, a space where you get a lot of value back from the interventions or the changes that you've been able to have and the impact that you have on businesses.
Yeah.
Have you got some success stories you can share with us around that?
Yeah, so I think, like, over my experience, and again, like you said, kind of working in the hard zone has been really helpful. Again, working with organizations where they've, a few spring to mind where, their culture maybe wasn't doing so well and their leaders didn't quite get it. Whereas, when you work with them and you sort of talk to them about, strengthening their speak up culture, starting with senior leaders and getting them to shift a little bit around the importance of having that great culture piece. So we're sort of lining the ducks up. So the senior leaders are on board. And then you start working, it takes time. You start working on that speak up culture and you simplify the process and you have a bit of a campaign around, how to speak up and what to do. Again, that really strong education piece around what is respect at work? What is, keeping people safe here, psychosocial safety? What do you do if you see it or you hear it or you're experiencing it? And to speak up early, and you've got, the people and culture team who understand how to do it well. The goal of that is obviously that people are speaking up early and they're not, allowing the behavior to continue. And also, as a bystander, they won't walk past it anymore as well, which is really effective, because if your bystanders are sort of nipping things in the bud for you, it helps a lot. So what I've seen in quite a few organizations, when, again, it's not an easy transformation piece, it does take time, but the organizations who sort of stick to the plan and they take that really measured approach, I wouldn't say it's always guaranteed, but if there is that strong commitment and it's a genuine and an honest commitment, the culture does improve, and we start losing these poor behaviors that might have historically been around for a long time. Usually you'll see a bit of an increase in, people reporting things, but if that's dealt with really well, then things start to really settle down. And then again, really hearing back. We were talking with a client recently that we've done quite a lot of work with, and they were just like, oh, we can't even explain to you how different the culture is now. And yeah, that's always amazing. And, even just hearing people who go through the courses and they just sort of, their mindset shifts a little bit and like, oh, okay, I get that now, particularly leaders as well. So, yeah.
You, and it's interesting, something you just said made me think about this. So if I don't run a large organization, I have a small business, but if I ran a large organization, the chances are if I put in place policies and the speak up reporting mechanisms, etc., the chances are if people felt safe, you might see an uptick of reports.
Yeah.
But the assumption is that as you manage those, then that will level out, because that behavior will stop and be weeded out of the businesses as well.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes I think leaders might be a little bit concerned to implement some of these because they are worried about the uptick in the reporting in the initial stages.
Yeah, that's called the head in the sand approach. And I totally understand that, because there's a lot of fear. It's like, if we start talking about this, if we run this program, this is going to, all hell's going to break loose. And my responses to that is it's going to break loose anyway, because
Yeah.
the damage that's happening in your culture at the moment, if, we're not dealing with, people who are behaving like this, and we call them like liabilities and ticking time bombs. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's one thing, and we hear this quite often, or leaders, oh, do we really want to run this session, or do we really want to ask people to be reporting things? The organizations who just go for it and they acknowledge it, they might have an engagement survey that said, hang on a second, we're not doing so well. Let's work on this, and let's sort of, again, about being authentic about it, speak up about it. People being held to account, like you said, we manage the issues. That sends a really strong message as well. Like, if you've got, situations that are happening and that they're being addressed, it sends that strong message. It's not okay anymore. The goalposts have changed. We have to draw sometimes a line in the sand. What was okay before, we understand now. Yeah, it's not okay today. And we've done, with the education on this, and we get it. Engagement scores will increase as well, usually when we see things like that.
A lot has changed in the last, if you have a look at the last 5 years, so much has changed in this space. What do you see happening in the future? Do you see more changes coming, or do you see more government legislation around this, more prosecutions, more highlights around this issue? What do you think will happen in the next 5 years around this? It's almost like it's hit a tipping point now, and it's like, well, where do we go from here?
So, yeah, for sure. I think with our new Respect at Work changes, I think that obviously organizations now are really trying to be more proactive rather than just reacting and waiting for the complaints to happen, because that's our requirement now. From a health and safety point of view, I think what we are already seeing is we're seeing many of our regulators starting to take a bit more of a stronger approach to psychosocial. We've had a couple of recent prosecutions, particularly in the Victorian jurisdiction, and around psychosocial and around looking at toxic workplaces. And usually that's on the back of something going wrong, and individuals being prosecuted because of poor behaviours like sexual harassment, like aggressive behaviours and things like that. We've even had a case not so long ago where the courts of Victoria, and we had a case where even the court system were prosecuted, failing to provide a safe workplace. Yeah, it's no longer a toothless tiger in this space when we talk about that health and safety side of it and the prosecution side of it, which is, again, really interesting to see. And I think it's just going to be going up and up and up and up, where we've got these cases coming. So, yeah, lots to, watch this space for.
Well, lots of good reasons to get those policies in place now rather than wait for something to happen. You work with businesses, so how do they contact you? How do they get you to come and have a positive impact on their business rather than wait when something goes wrong?
Obviously, I've got my 2 websites. So I've got my Karen Maher website, that's more of the keynote speaking, and our Smart Culture website. And so I've got a really great team of trainers, and we've got some, pretty interactive programs that we can work with and help with some speak up, help getting the speak up processes looking a bit stronger and things like that. But yeah, pretty easy to catch. Dr. Google.
Dr. Google, Karen Maher, or Smart Culture. Karen, thank you so much for your time. It's such an important topic, and thank you for sharing your incredible knowledge in this space and all the work that you do. More businesses need to get you into their businesses to have a conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you today.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast, and don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.